Hello. In this video, my dad put on his other hat as a pastor and talk about faith and adoption. Let's go. 1, 2, 3.
Let's go. So I actually graduated from seminary with a Master's of Divinity, and I've been in ministry in one shape or form or the other to children, youth, and families for 25 years. Oh my goodness. So all of that said, I have an interesting perspective on faith and adoption. I thought we'd talk about that today. I've got to talk about Jeremiah 7. Israel was having this really selfish time, you might want to say, and God told them they were heading for disaster. And yet even, now if they would turn away from their ways, that God would change things, and that God has this, as we see in a famous verse later, God has this plan for them. And if they would just change from their ways, that plan would be fulfilled in them. But they're not going to. And God, specifically in Jeremiah 7, says that they are mistreating the widow, foreigner, and the fatherless. And that's one of the main things. It says that is false religion, right? That is false religion when you mistreat these people. So basically the folks who can't care for themselves, or the people on the fringes of society. God held up the fatherless as those who need to be cared for if you're going to have a real faith, right? Now, that does not mean that every single person who follows the way of Christ has to adopt children or has to be a foster parent, but certainly it means that we all have to lift them up, so that we all have to value and pursue ways that we can take care of those who can't care for themselves. I love that part of Scripture, and I think it really shows a lot about who God is, and that God's heart is for those who are on the outsides of society, or those who can't care for themselves. That God demands that these people be taken care of, that they be watched over, and that's part of our faith. If you're a follower of the way of Jesus Christ, that is part of who we are. All right, so as we look at that, a couple things. One, many Christians will tell you that they're adopting, or that they adopted their child, and that was God's plan all along. Or they'll even tell their children this, that God planned for you to be with us. And that's a really beautiful sentiment, and I hate to burst their bubble, but we're plan B. We are plan B. We are not plan A. So God had this beautiful plan for this family to work out. And those of you who are interested in foster care especially, this is why reunification is so important. That God's plan A is for that child to be with their family. However, God gives people free will. And that's part of love, right? We can't truly love God if we don't choose to love God. If we were forced to love God, it wouldn't be valuable, or it wouldn't be as valuable. And so God gives us free will. And as part of that free will, we make mistakes. And some of those mistakes are huge, and even family mistakes that are huge and soul-crushing, right? Like not taking care of children as they should be cared for. So that's plan A, for them to be with their families. Plan B, though, there has to be someone who's willing to be there as plan B. And I'm not saying that God didn't plan for us to be plan B. I do think God does that. God puts it on our hearts, and has specific people that God calls for specific children to care for them. But I do think God calls certain people to care for certain kids as part of the plan B. God has already called people to be plan A, and whether they respond or not, that's on them and their communities. I should say it's on them and their communities. But that said, we're a good plan B. Another question that folks may have about faith and foster care or adoption is, why would God let something like this happen? And I have to say that, that is so hard. Why would God allow children to go through abuse and neglect and to not be cared for? We're so quick to blame God when God calls us to beautiful things and we choose not to follow that path. We're so quick to say that this is God's fault. So God called us to a beautiful way of living. God sent Christ as a way to exemplify that beautiful way of living. And sometimes we just we just don't follow that. And it's really tragic. It's really tragic. And I'm sure that God has feelings about that. And I'm sure God has feelings, but God calls us to this beautiful way of living, and sometimes we don't follow it, and because of that, people get hurt. It's just how it is. People get hurt. And it's tragic and it's hard. And part of our job as followers of Christ, followers of the way of Jesus, is to be the people in this world who bring light into the darkness. Because there is definitely darkness in this world. And so part of who we are is that we are called to be Christ bearers. So we have Christ in us, shining through us to the world, so that people can know and see Christ in our actions and through our love. In fact, I was reading a little while back that early church, people didn't join that early church because they're like, wow, that's great theology. No. Or, oh, I love that music. No, people joined the early church because they saw the way people interacted with each other. They saw the way they cared for each other and loved each other. They saw that and they wanted it. They wanted to be part of it. They wanted to know that love intensely. And so they joined that early church, and that grew extremely fast, right? For us, part of that love is in how we care for foster children, but also in how we care for their families, right? And that said, part of that love too is in caring for those who can't care for themselves. That is part of whether you're called to care for widows, orphans, foreigners who don't have a means here, whatever it is, that's part of our calling as people of faith. And it's very visible in Scripture that that's who we're called to. I love that part of the calling of the church early on was when children were left to exposure, or they were left out because they had disabilities or whatever. They were left on the hillside to die. Basically, these young infants were left to die. Christians were the ones who went out, who walked those hills, found those children, and adopted them. They gave them hope. They gave them life when there was none. And I think that's who we are as people of faith. Our calling is to give people hope, give people life, bring light into the world, and be that Christ-bearing image. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to sharing more videos in the future. If you have any questions, please let me know. I would love to help you sort through those, or maybe even create more content for YouTube about those. Thank you very much.